In this video, I'm going to be talking about why the eddy currents that form behind the riffles in your sluice or high banker are essential for it to work, but paradoxically are also responsible for you losing gold. G'day, welcome to Mad Scientist Prospecting. My name's 𝗏𝘁𝘂𝗏𝗏, and if you're new to the channel, because we've had a bit of a bump in subscriptions the last little while, this is going to be some pretty sciencey stuff. So if there's anything that doesn't make sense, jump into the comments, ask questions. I'll be hanging around to answer comments and try and explain things if I don't do a good enough job right now. Now, the first thing is how these eddy currents are essential. And if you set your sluice up so that they're not there, then as you start throwing even a little bit of dirt down the sluice, the space between the riffles is going to fill up and clog. And then anything you put down the sluice is pretty much just going to go all the way through. So it's essential that the eddy currents are there working with enough strength that they keep that area between the riffles clear, otherwise you don't get gold. When you get your sluice or your high banker set up, you've got water racing down through it. And then behind the riffle, there is an area of sheltered water, water that is sheltered from the flow shooting across the top of the riffle. Now, through the process of friction, where you've got the high velocity water moving across the top, you get friction between that water and the sheltered water behind the riffle. But it's very much like the wheel on a bike or a wheelbarrow that is off the ground and you're hitting it to get it to spin. That's what that high velocity water is doing as it flows across. It's hitting the top of it and getting it to spin.
Oh my lord, that is a seriously oversimplified analogy. But this video is already going to be long enough, so I'm not going to explain it to what's actually going on. That'll have to be another time.
Now, just like a tire when you do a burnout, too much velocity, you lose traction, and that eddy current doesn't form properly. And the ideal strength of flow, velocity of flow that you want going down your sluice or high banker is going to depend on a whole bunch of factors, not least of which is the dirt that you're running through your sluice and what you've done to it before you've put it down the sluice or the high banker. You've got some of those particles that have got a small enough surface area with a large enough mass that they've fallen in behind the riffle. And the way that happens, and I've talked about this in another video, is that the particles flying along with the high velocity water, and it's moving up and down, and it just happens to move down and touch the top of that eddy current. And because that eddy current is moving slower, the water behind that sheltered area will drag on the particle as it dips down through the high velocity water and touches that eddy current. And in doing so, the particle will lose energy. And because the particle's energy at this point is mostly expressed in terms of kinetic energy or movement energy, as it loses energy, it also loses velocity. Incidentally, as that energy is transferred to the eddy current, so the eddy current actually speeds up, but the particle slows down and it will drift down a little further as it's pulled down by gravity. If it gets pulled down enough, it will fall out of the high velocity stream and then be into the sheltered area behind the riffle and into this eddy. Now, if it's got a small SAM, a small surface area to mass ratio, which means its mass is relatively big, its surface area is relatively small, it won't go up the back of the riffle. It'll get caught between the sluice and the base of the riffle. But if it's got a larger surface area to mass ratio, it'll jump around and it'll actually even jump up. If it's got a larger surface area to mass ratio, it may even do the full circuit and go up and around, and it'll go into the top of the eddy current, get accelerated because the eddy current moves the fastest at the top where it's being accelerated by the current hitting it. The velocity of the water shooting over the riffles is hitting it, so that's where it's moving the fastest, so it's getting accelerated. And then as it goes down, it slows down even a little bit more on the bottom of the sluice, and then goes up, and then vroom, and it's not a uniform velocity in that current. Where was I? Oh, dancing, that's right. Yes. Now, you may have heard on other YouTube channels, other people talking about this and how the riffles are supposed to work is that the particles behind the riffles are supposed to dance. They're always supposed to be moving. That's a really good sign that the eddy current is doing its job. Now, if nothing else changes, those particles that have been caught behind those riffles from the first few handfuls of dirt that you threw down your sluice are going to be behind those riffles, dancing away indefinitely. But of course, things are going to change because you're going to throw some more dirt down. Now, quartz tends to be relatively spherical, chunky, which means it has a low surface area relative to its mass. So even though it's not a very dense material, it does tend to have a low surface area to its mass. So when you put stuff down there, it's often you get little bits of quartz that'll be caught behind the riffles. They're going to continue dancing away, jiving away, having fun, and then you're going to put more dirt down. And as you do, more and more boisterous dancers are going to join the party. Now, things like magnetite, which also tends to be round and chunky, are going to start joining in, and they throw their weight around. And what happens is that because a lower surface area to mass ratio than the bits of quartz, and they come in and they just go poof, and they'll bump the quartz. So whenever you have two particles clash, there is a transfer of energy from the high energy particle to the low energy particle. And because of the nature of the clash, a bump, that energy is transferred into the form of kinetic energy. And so the quartz particle, let's say, in this example, will fly off a little bit. That extra energy may take a quartz particle that was just sitting behind the riffle bopping and cause it to jump. If the energy is enough, then it may even cause that quartz particle to do a full circle. And because there'll be other particles doing that full circle and jumping with it, there's going to be more collisions. And if those collisions are such that the quartz particle picks up enough energy, it might get bumped up into the high velocity water and then go boom out of the eddy current and out of the sluice. Now that's what you want to happen, because who wants to throw dirt down their sluice to collect quartz? You want those big and the boring things to go. And as you continue putting more dirt, you're going to get more gold, more black sands, more gems, more other things that have a lower surface area to mass ratio. But where these eddy currents can start to lose you gold is dependent upon the particle distribution and the particle composition of what you're putting down the sluice. Now, one of the places where this can be a real problem is Reedy Creek, which is in the 𝗏𝘗𝗿𝗏𝗏 region of Victoria. There you have black sands which are made of tin dioxide, and you have a lot of gold which is quite fine, in fact even to the point of very fine. And the black sands, the tin dioxide, tends to be quite chunky. And since tin dioxide is one of the heaviest things you will find in a creek, they have a very low surface area to their mass. The gold particles, on the other hand, are often flat, which means they have a very high surface area relative to their mass. And because they're small as well, small things have a much greater surface area than big things relative to their mass. You have a situation where you've got all these tin dioxide black sands jiving and head banging quite violently, very vigorously behind the riffles. And the little gold comes in, and if it does end up behind the riffle, a good percentage of it can just get bounced off the dance floor, thrown back into the current, and race downstream. It might end up behind a riffle further down, but often as not, what happens is that things that can be moved tend to be moved, and they go. So what often you'll hear people talk about, they only find gold in the first few riffles. Well, that's because under the flow conditions that you're operating your sluice in, you'll tend to find the things that will collect in those first few riffles. Any gold that is finer, you might get a little bit of it further downstream behind the riffles that are lower in the box, but most gold that can't handle the dance floor, when it's got these other particles, will tend to be lost down the sluice and out into the river. So how do we deal with this? Now, do you care is the first issue. Now the first thing you might think of is, well, we can lessen the flow and that will reduce the strength of the eddy current. You could do that, except there's a very real risk that the eddy current will stop working, and that's a bigger problem. Now the first thing you can do is classify. But the thing is that strategy of classifying material before you put it through the sluice has limited utility in a lot of areas. If we go back to the Reedy Creek example, 𝙁𝙧𝙤𝙬𝗵𝗴𝗏𝗏, the gold there is really fine and very, very small compared to the tin dioxide particles. And even using a number 20 mesh is probably not going to solve this problem, because there's a lot of gold that is really, really fine, and a lot of the tin dioxide particles are going to be small enough to get through a number 20 mesh, but still cause you problems in the eddy currents in the dance floor with the really fine gold. The second thing you can do, because this process takes time, it takes time for those vigorous dancers behind the riffles to build up to the point where they're kicking the more gentle dancers off the floor. If you clean out your sluice on a regular and frequent basis, then you are going to be losing less of that gold, because less of it's going to be kicked out over time. If you're doing sampling, or you're doing small discrete areas like a particular crevice or a particular feature, that's no big deal, because you're probably going to do that anyway. But if you're at a larger feature and you want to spend a day just going for it, then frequent cleanouts they can slow you down. So a third thing you can do is alter your equipment. Now you'll see a lot of people doing this, a lot of manufacturers selling equipment that does this, where you have multiple boxes. Unfortunately, without a good understanding of the fluid dynamics involved, and that's why I'm doing this video, so that you guys can understand this better, and therefore you can either build your own equipment that will do a better job, or buy equipment that will do a better job, is that if you have the same size box all the way through, you've got the same flow conditions all the way through, which means you've got the same problem all the way through. Other manufacturers and other people, you'll see them use different boxes. They'll have, you know, a narrow box, a wider box, and possibly even, you know, a wider box again. But the reason that the finer golds, the things that have got the small surface area to mass ratio, are being kicked out from that space behind the riffles and thrown downstream is because of their fellow dancers. The flow conditions in a sluice will allow a particle to fall into that eddy current, but if it stays there or not is dependent on what it's dancing with. And so the only way to really, really reliably get multiple boxes to get that superfine gold is if you are getting rid of the dancers that are responsible for kicking that gold on and getting it to move on, which means that between boxes you've got to have some extra form of classification.
And the old timers understood this. But when I say the old timers, I'm not talking about the guys from the 1850s. I'm talking about the guys from the 1550s. And here's some pictures from the 𝐷𝐸𝐸𝐵𝐸 which clearly show different sluice boxes with classification between sluice boxes. And it's odd that this practice was lost.
That can be tricky to do. It's one of the things that's held up the design and the build of my own high banker. And after hearing all this and basing this upon your own field experience, you might say, well, I don't care that much. Which is a perfectly good response. We're doing this for fun, not to make money. And depending on the area that you're working, a good percentage of the gold is going to be stuff that's relatively easy to capture. And that's the stuff that you're going to find at the top of your first box. It's only in some areas where, due to the particle distribution of the gold, the particle distribution of the other minerals within the dirt that you're running, or because maybe you're running a lot of material, like this is particularly relevant to the hard rock miners who are going to be dealing with a lot of fine material, and a few extra percentage points of recovery can make a big difference in terms of their profit. It's only at that level or under those circumstances that you really need to care. But understanding the theory, understanding what's going on, I reckon for a lot of people is going to help you to find more gold faster and more efficiently, and that's why I'm doing these video series. Now, it's not essential that you understand this theoretical basis for what we do. There's plenty of guys out there, incredibly experienced prospectors who found a lot more gold than me and continue to find a lot more gold than me, because when it comes down to it, your practical knowledge of how to go out and find gold is always going to be superior to theoretical knowledge. The idea, the whole premise of these videos though, is that you couple practical experience with an accurate understanding of the theory, then you will find more. The theoretical stuff doesn't replace the practical. The practical is more important, but the theory added to the practical experience is superior. But if you have to choose one or the other, you much choose the practical. But why not choose both, is my point. Now, I've I got involved in a Facebook debate a little while ago, last week, and it didn't go well. In fact, it went really, really badly. One of the things that came out of that discussion was just how many people, almost all of them, didn't get the basic science. There's a video I've been planning to do which was so cool. It had a fabulous explanation and discussion involving Bernoulli theory, which is essential to fluid dynamics. But the guy was trying to get beyond Bernoulli theory to what was actually physically happening, because Bernoulli theory is a mental tool to help us understand things. And what the people I was talking with were failing to understand is that pressure is also a mental tool. It's not a real thing. It's a ratio that we use to help us interpret and describe and talk about things that we're going on. It's a ratio between force and area, not a real thing. And for you, viewers watching this, you might think pressure's not a real thing. That's a bit mad. Well, if that's the case, then you're really going to like the video that I'm going to do, where I really get down and explain the physical reality of what pressure is and what it isn't. So stay tuned for that video. I make no promises on when it's going to do, because these fluid dynamics videos, these theoretical videos, are much harder to do than the videos where I just go out and have fun with the kids. So it'll come, I'm not sure when, but stay tuned. And I'll catch you guys digging probably next. I've got a trip planned to Malden coming up, which is going to be very fun because they've got great ice cream, great fudge, and some really, really nice gold. Catch you guys later. Bye-bye. Go away! Oh. This is my crossroads. I must say, it's a public place. They're entitled to be here just as much as me. This is true. This is true. Go on! Da-da-da-da-da. Another car. I had it then. I really had it. No, don't stop. Keep going. I'm trying to film here. No. Oh. Yes, it's a camera. Do you know how many takes I've done? I moved here to get peace and quiet. Go away now. Right, where was I? Right. Now it's a Where was I? Don't.
1950, 1550.
I feel like saying dancing, but that's wrong.
Saying what?
Dancing.
Dancing.
Yeah, just be quiet. It should only take 30 seconds.